We're in Isaiah today, but I'm going to take a little bit of time to get there. I'm doing that on purpose, and hopefully they will tie together well. So we're going to actually, if you have your Bibles, we'll start over in Judges chapter 6. And so if you want to go ahead and begin turning there. I have told y'all stories before about probably my all-time favorite teacher, whether it was college or seminary or high school. But my all-time favorite teacher was a man in high school. His name was Mr. Hamlet. I've told y'all stories about him before. But one of the things he did quite a bit in class was we would always kind of play little games together. So he had games that we would play when we finished our work. I had him for Latin and for AP History. And so one of our favorite games was a game called Race Cars. That was a game I actually played with my kids quite a bit to help them study when they were in school. And another game, he would just sometimes call on people and then just ask them questions. But one of the things that happened one day in class that I remember very, very well, because it was just a typical Mr. Hamlet thing, he always called us boys and girls. Now, just to kind of set it, I was tempted to even show you a picture of him, for the setting. Mr. Hamlet, before he was a high school teacher, he was a professional wrestler. Now, I said that in a particular way because Mr. Hamlet would tell us, he's passed away, but if he was here, he would tell us wrestling is what they do in the Olympics, what they do in high school. And you have to be a little older to get this reference. But he would say, so wrestling is what they do in high school, it's what they do in the Olympics. Wrestling is what they did on Sunday morning in Nashville's Channel 17. But what they did on Fox back in the day, it was what we would call the WWE, but back then it was just like this local thing. So he was a professional wrestler on TV, and so you kind of get this picture of this guy, but he would call us boys and girls, and one of the things he did one day was he said to us, he's like, we finished our work, what we were going to do in class, and he said, boys and girls, for the rest of class today, I'd like to play a game. And this is what we're going to do. Mr. Hamlet needs to grade some papers, and y'all need to work on your homework. So I'm going to ask you to work on your homework, and we're going to be very quiet. And Mr. Hamlet's going to stay at his desk, and y'all are going to be very, very quiet. And then, as the time progresses, y'all are going to start talking to each other, and you're going to get louder and louder to the point where Mr. Hamlet can't handle it. And then, boys and girls, I'm going to throw stuff at you. And I'm going to scream, and I'm going to yell. And then you're going to get really quiet, and we're just going to keep doing that over and over for the rest of class. Well, it was a joke, because Courtney's a teacher. She can tell you that's what kids do. They're very quiet. They get louder and louder, and then the teacher has to yell, and then they get quiet, and you keep doing this over and over. When I think about that, it's kind of a silly way to introduce it, but in the book of Judges, we have that kind of cycle in a much more serious way that goes on and on. In the book of Judges, we have a cycle where the people cry out to God, they listen to God, God comes, God helps them, then they turn away from God, they turn towards idols, and then everything gets really, really bad for them, and then in the midst of it getting really, really bad for them, they cry out to God, God sends a new leader, that leader calls them back to God, they do really good for a generation or two, and then guess what happens? They turn to idols, and the cycle just goes over and over and over. So in Judges chapter 6, we start this cycle, and we can see this is kind of, Judges gives us bookends, or kind of shows us these stories and gives us these cycles. So we see this cycle in Judges chapter 6. It says, the Israelites did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, so the Lord handed them over to Midian 7 years. Now, this is the story we're going to talk about in chapter 6, but it's bookend. If you go over to chapter 10, you can see kind of the other end of this bookend. After this whole story is completed, they do well, things are going well. Then the Israelites, again, did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. They worshiped the Baals, the Ashtoreths, the gods of Aram, Sidon, and Moab, the gods of the Ammonites and the Philistines. They abandoned the Lord and did not worship him. So chapter 6, chapter 7, or chapter 10 are kind of bookends of the story we're going to talk about. So in between this story is the story of somebody that most of us, if we grew up in Sunday school, we kind of knew the story of Gideon. Now, the story of Gideon, there's a lot that kind of goes on with Gideon's story, but the thing that I want you to kind of think through of this story is Gideon's story. The first story we read is the story where we get the term there in chapter 6, the term of putting out a fleece, where Gideon puts out this fleece to make sure that God is calling him. But then after that story, if we jump over into verse 13, we have the beginning of this new story. So God calls Gideon. Gideon accepts the calling. And then we have this statement in verse 13. So let's look. It says, Gideon said to him, "Please, my Lord, if the Lord is with us, why is all this happening? And where are all his wonders that our ancestors told us about? They said, hasn't the Lord brought us out of Egypt? But now the Lord has abandoned us and handed us over to Midian." Verse 14, the Lord turned to him and said, "Go in the strength you have and deliver Israel from the grasp of Gideon. I am sending you." So he said, "Please, Lord, what can I deliver, or how can I deliver Israel? My family is the weakest in Manasseh, and I am the youngest in my father's family." Verse 16, here's the declaration of God, "But I will be with you," the Lord said, "and you will strike Midian down as if it were one man." So God calls Gideon, and Gideon has just confessed to us. If you were with us a few weeks ago, we talked about David. This should sound similar, where Gideon says to God, "Why me? I am from a weak family, and not only am I from a weak family, I am the weakest, or I am the youngest of my family. I am not the person you should choose." And God's reply to that statement is simply, but I'm with you. I'm with you. My presence is with you. And so the story of Gideon is the story not about Gideon's strength, but it's the story of God's presence. Simply in the statement that God says to Gideon, "But I will be with you." So now we have to go into the story, and we begin kind of walking into the story that we're going to talk about today. They decide to attack Midian, or God tells them to attack the Midianites. And so they have this army, and so they have this huge army. They're going to do battle. The army is about 32,000 people to go to battle. And God looks at the army, and God says, no. This is a way too big of an army. We're not taking 32,000 people to war. So this, Gideon, what I want you to do is I want you to gather everybody, and you tell them, if you're afraid to go to war, go home. So guess what? Of the 32,000, 22,000 of them leave. So now we have an army of 10,000. Still not a bad army. And God looks at the army, and God says, it's too big. It's too big of an army. So then he does, and if you remember the story from Sunday school, then he says to them, send the army down to the water and have them drink. So they go down to the water, and the men that kneel on their hands and knees and put their face in the water like a dog and lap the water up. So some people do that, and then there's another group that puts the water in their hands and drinks. And so some do this one way, some do another way, and so God says, all of them that got down on their hands and knees like a dog, send them home. But the ones that picked up the water and brought it to their mouth, keep them. So remember, 32,000 to 22,000, or 32,000 down to 10,000. Now of that 10,000, guess how many we have left? 300. From 32,000 to 300. Now I can remember, I don't remember if it was at school or Sunday school, but I can remember teachers saying to us, well, this is what God was doing. That God was the people that put their face in the water. They weren't protected, and somebody could jump up from behind them and attack them. But the people that picked the water up, those were the good warriors. And the more I've read this story this week, I don't know if that's true. I think God just wanted the smallest army he could get. And so we have this army of 300 people. 300 people. So we're going to fight the Midianites. So that picks us up. Verse 7. So the Lord said to Gideon, I will deliver you with 300 men who lapped and hand the Midianites over to you. But everyone else, go home. Now, I want you to notice what we're looking at. I will deliver you. Now that's future tense. But also, God is already making the proclamation of who's going to win this war, isn't he? So we can jump down to verse 9. So verse 9, that night the Lord said to him, get up, attack the camp. And here's the verb tense. That I have what? Handed it over to you. Now, notice the verb tense. God does not say, get up, attack the camp, and we're going to see how this goes. You and your 300 men, maybe you'll be able to pull this off. No. God says what? Go attack the camp because the battle's already won. You and your 300 men. So then after this, we have this, Gideon's not super sure about it, so we have this dream. Gideon has this dream, and then after the dream, it's interpreted, and then we have this statement. It says, his friend answered, this is nothing less than the sword of Gideon, son of Joash, the Israelite. God has handed, what's the verb tense? God has handed the entire Midianite camp to him. Now, it doesn't end there. We can go on to verse 15. When Gideon heard the account of the dream and its interpretation, he bowed down in worship. He returned to Israel's camp and said, get up, for the Lord has handed the Midianite camp over to you. What's the verb tense? Time and time again in this story, the verbs are telling us, and God's words are telling Gideon, the battle is already won. Now, if the battle's already won, there are some things we probably need to process. Some things that we need to kind of think about. The first thing we need to remember and that we need to think about is that these are the statements that God has made. First, I will deliver you, for I have handed it over to you. And God has handed. God is at the center of all this, right? But what is the plan? What is God's plan for beating this army? Maybe it's because God knows 300 men are enough. Because how big could this army really be? I mean, they're fighting the Ammonites. This is ancient times. How big could this army really be? Well, verse 12, we skipped over it. What does verse 12 tell us? Now the Midianites, the Amalekites, and all the people of the east had settled down in the valley, like what? A swarm of locusts. And their camels were as innumerable as the sand on the seashore. So, how many people? We have 300 versus a swarm of locusts. Camels innumerable as the sand on the seashore. Think through the odds. Think about what is going on in this passage. So here's the battle plan. So God says to him, all right, we have 300 men. This is what we're going to do. I'm going to break you up into groups of 100. So I want 100 of you over here, 100 of you over here, and 100 of you over here. And then, you know what Gideon would say, like, okay, so God, what's the plan? Like, what's this special weapon that you have? You have something that you're going to give the 300 of us, and it's going to be incredible. Like this big sword or something. Like, what is it that you're going to do? And God says, okay, this is what we're going to do. I've got some things that I want you to take with you. So all 300 of you, I want you to take a ram's horn. I want you to take a torch. And I want you to take a clay pitcher. This is clay. It looks like metal, I know, but. And a clay pitcher. Here are your implements of war, Israelites. This is how you're going to defeat your enemies. Now, obviously, none of us were there that day. I can imagine they were a little worried about the plan. I'm sure many of them were looking at each other thinking, what are we doing? There is no way we're going to win this battle. No way. We are carrying worthless items. So what happened? So now, verse 19, Gideon and the 100 men who were with him went to the outpost of the camp at the beginning of the middle watch, after the sentries had been stationed. They blew their ram's horns. It sounds like metal, doesn't it? They took their pitchers, torches lit, and broke the pitchers. Blew the ram horn, broke the pitchers. The three companies blew their ram's horn and shattered their pitchers and held their torches in their left hands, and the ram horns blew in their right hands and shouted, "A sword for the Lord and for Gideon." Each Israelite took his position around the camp, and the entire Midianite army began to run, and they cried out as they fled. When Gideon's men blew their 300 ram's horns, the Lord caused the men and the whole army to turn on each other with their swords. They fled the acacia house and in the direction of Zerah, as far as the border of Abel Mohilah near Tabith. So what happened? But what happened was God had already proclaimed the victory. God had already decided who was going to win. The story of Gideon is a story that is a reminder to us that through the weakest family and the smallest army, God pre-declared a victory, showing us a pattern of the way that he works. God's strength through our weakness. God's strength when we have nothing but a pitcher, a torch, and a ram's horn, completely defenseless, completely ill-equipped for the battle ahead of us. God wins the victory. So that's the setting of our story today. Let's flip over to the passage we're going to look at today. Bad news, that was the intro to my sermon. Okay, we're not going to spend that much time in Isaiah. Isaiah, chapter 8. We're going to be looking at chapter 9, but I want to back up just a couple verses because I want you to see a couple things. Number one, in our English Bibles, we don't break the verses the same way that the Jewish Bibles break these. So most Jewish Bibles are going to start chapter 9 with what we call chapter 8, verse 21. All right, so I'm going to back up because I think it's going to give us a little bit more context of where we're going in chapter 9. So if you back up just a couple verses, Isaiah chapter 8, verse 21 says to us, talking about the people of God, they will wander through the land, dejected and hungry. When they are famished, they will become enraged, and looking up will curse their king and their God. They will look towards the earth and see only distress, darkness, and the gloom of affliction, and they will be driven into thick darkness. Chapter 9, verse 1. Nevertheless, the gloom of the distressed land will not be like that of former times, when he humbled the land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali. But in the future, he will bring honor to the way of the sea and to the land east of the Jordan and to Galilee of the nations. So this is the setting of Isaiah chapter 9. This is a people who are looking down towards the earth. Why? I've spent a lot of time in the dark on trails. And even with the technology we have with headlamps today, if you're in the dark and you're on a trail, you are focused at where you're stepping. You're focused straight down, making sure that this step is going to be a good step to take. And so where are the people looking in the midst of this darkness? They're looking down at their feet. But they're looking down in distress, in darkness, in the gloom of affliction. And they are driven into thick darkness, more darkness, and in the midst of this darkness, Isaiah makes a proclamation. Isaiah speaks to the people on behalf of God. In verse 2, he says, the people walking in darkness, that's the people of Israel, we'll call it us this morning, the people walking in darkness have seen a great light. The light has dawned on those living in the land of darkness. Now, just a couple things just very quickly that I want you to see. One of those statements right there on that last line, living in the land of darkness, some of your translations might translate this a little bit different. This is the same Hebrew word that is used by David in the 23rd Psalm. For the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me lie down in green pastures, leads me beside the still waters. Though I walk through the valley of what? The shadow of death. The people walking in darkness have seen a great light. The light has dawned on those living in the shadow of death. This term in Hebrew is the darkest of the dark. This term in Hebrew says to us, what is the darkest that could possibly be? Well, the darkest thing that could possibly exist is death. And do you know the only thing that's darker than death? Death's shadow. The only thing darker than death itself is the shadow that that follows behind death. So the writer in Hebrew is saying to us here, those of us living in the darkest of the dark, those who living in the darkest times of our lives, in the darkest times of whatever it is we're going through, those are the people that Isaiah is talking to. So the people living in darkness, those people have seen a great light. The light has dawned on those who are living in the darkest of the dark. And then Isaiah does something weird here. Isaiah does something that isn't normal for most of the prophets and most of the passages we're going to look at. Most of these passages are the prophet speaking on behalf of God. Well, now Isaiah kind of turns and he begins talking to God on behalf of us. So verse 3, Isaiah speaks to God and says, you have enlarged the nation and increased its joy. The people have rejoiced before you as they rejoice at harvest time, as they rejoice when dividing spoils. Remember, this is a time, and I know we have Thanksgiving next week, but this is a time in the world you didn't know if your crops were going to be fruitful until you got it in the storehouse. Now, you can go out and you can look at your crops and you can say they're doing great, and you can think you're in a good place. And then locusts could come and devour all of it in a matter of days. And so we're writing to a time, and so he's saying to the people, you have enlarged, or saying to God, you've enlarged the nation, you've increased the joy. The people are rejoicing the way they would rejoice once they get all that they've grown for the year and they've put it away. They can't run to Walmart. They can't run to Publix. They've got it all stored. They know their family is going to be fed for the next year. It's that kind of joy. Verse 4. For you have shattered the oppressive yoke, and the rod on their shoulders, and the staff of their oppressor, just as you did to the Midianites. What we see you doing, the way we see you acting, God, is the way you've acted before. The time when we didn't think there was a way out, the time when none of it made any sense to us, the time, God, when you picked the worst family and the youngest in that family to lead 300 people to battle, that's the kind of work you're doing. Again, just as you did on the day of Midian, just as you have done in the past. Verse 5, for every trampling boot of battle and the bloodied garments of war will be burned as fuel for the fire. So Isaiah has changed back. Now God is speaking to us. For a child, verse 6, for a child will be born for us. A son will be given to us. And the government will be on his shoulders, and he will be named Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Eternal Father, Prince of Peace. In verse 7, the dominion will be vast, And his prosperity will never end. He will reign on the throne of David and over his kingdom to establish and sustain it with justice and righteousness from now on and forever. The zeal of the Lord's armies will accomplish this. So let me pull all of this together. Let's go back to verse 2. The people, walking in darkness, have seen a great light. The light has dawned on those living in the land of darkness. I think this morning there's many of us who feel that we are walking in darkness. Many of us who feel that the valley of the shadow of death isn't just a pretty poetic thing in the 23rd Psalm, but it's reality. Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death is real. And for some of us, our cry out to God and our prayer is, God, I don't know how I'm going to fight this darkness. And we stand there. We stand there completely ill-equipped for the battle that's before us. We stand there completely outnumbered from the darkness. We stand there not ready for the battle that we think that we have to fight. And we kind of look silly, don't we? We're unprepared. We're not ready. And we have been walking in this darkness ill-prepared and unready. And the world looks at us and says, I thought you came to fight. You didn't come to fight. How are you going to grab your sword? Both your hands are taken up. And it's in this moment. It's in this moment of ill-prepared. It's in this moment where we don't know how to fight. That God says there is a light. It's not about a torch. But there is a light, and that light's going to show you what it looks like. The light's going to show you what it looks like to fight. The light's going to show you what it looks like to live. The light's going to show you what life really is. And that light's not the torch of Gideon. But the light is a child. For a child will be born for us. A light. A son will be given. The government doesn't sit on your shoulders. The government doesn't sit on the United States' shoulders. The government doesn't sit on the president's shoulders. The government is on his shoulders. The light. And he has a name. His name is Wonderful. Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Eternal Father, Prince of Peace. I know many of the battles that we face, we come into them ill-equipped. We come into them when a world says, church, you don't even know how to fight. Or we come in sometimes and the world says to us, if you want to fight, we'll tell you how to fight. This is how you fight. You take up arms, you do all of these other things. This is what fighting looks like. You need to fight like us. And I hope we hear this morning a God that says, I've already won the battle. The fight's already over. But the fight doesn't look like a warrior. The fight doesn't look like 32,000 soldiers. The fight doesn't even look like a ram's horn and a torch. But this Advent, the fight looks like a baby. The one that we call Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Eternal Father, Prince of Peace. Today, I don't know the darkness that you face. Some of you, I might have an idea. And I know for many of us, we walk into the darkness feeling very ill-equipped. But my hope and my prayer is looking at Isaiah, looking at the story of Gideon, we are reminded about verb tenses. That the battle was won. There was no doubt in God's story that whether or not Gideon was going to win that battle. There is no doubt in Isaiah of whether or not this child is going to be born. Because for them, they believe and we believe so strong in the Word of God that what is coming in the future and what God promises for the future has already happened. Because we serve a God who doesn't fight the way that we think we should fight. But he wins our battles for us, even the battles in the darkness. Even the battles of proclaiming who he is and shining the light of who he is. This morning, my hope and my prayer for us is that we quit fighting. Or quit fighting our way and start saying, God, how do you want us to shine that light? How do you want us as the people of God to make a proclamation in this Advent? I know we're a couple weeks away. This Advent, I hope our proclamation are these words. For unto us a child is born. A son is given to us. And everything will rest on his shoulders. Everything. And he will be named Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Eternal Father, Prince of Peace. I know it's hard to believe, but whatever darkness we face, that is enough for the darkness, because it's enough for everything. Today, as we close, John is going to come and lead us in a song. If you would like this morning an opportunity to pray with a pastor, Pastor James would love the opportunity to pray with you right down at this altar. This morning, if you need to be anointed for healing, for any spiritual, emotional, physical, whatever that might be, I would love the opportunity to pray with you right down at this altar. But there might be some other of us that just say, you know what, Pastor, the darkness is pretty heavy. It's pretty dark. Pastor, when you talk about the valley of the shadow of death, that there is something very, very dark, I'm in the middle of it. And I just need to be reminded that there is a light, that there is a child, that there is a hope. That this battle that I'm facing, as much as I want to fight it, that there's a God that wants to fight it too. And somehow a God who's already won that fight. And maybe today we just need to kind of just come and find a place to kneel at one of these altars and just say, Lord, here is my darkness, here is my battle, it's yours. I don't know how to fight it, but I know you do. Let us stand as we sing.